Daily Trust newspaper. The lead story here says election violence claims 1,525 lives in 25 years. It has the riders that says Boko Haram, IPOP, bandits' biggest threat to 2023 polls, according to a report. Politicians' excesses pose risk to elections, says analyst. A breakdown of security threats to 2023 general elections is right there below in an infographic format. On page 4 you find the details, but the front page there offers you the infograph there where you would see that a list of records of election violence in the country since 1960. In 1999, for instance, there's a figure of 80, 2003 you have 100, 2007 you have 300. In 2011, the 2011 so far has the highest number of people that were killed in elections. 800 is the number there. Is the most deadly election period of the past 25 years according to the records. You also have 2015 100 people, 2019 145. What happens in 2023? Those are the issues that we're going to be looking at on the show today. Other breakdown of the figures is right there. Now below that, you would see governors abandoning rural areas, building needless flyovers, airports, according to the federal government. You'd find that on page 6. And then above the lead story, PDP APC bicker over arraignment of ex-minister Bilbis. Pupils to be taught in mother tongue. That's according to the federal government. Student who criticized Aisha Buhari remanded in prison. The writer says CUPP demands his unconditional release. At a footnote, you have troops recovered 2 female corpses, rescue 3 victims in Kaduna. Kerosene hits 1,000 for a litre as food prices soar. You also have only 33 rapists convicted for over 11,000 cases, and that's according to the federal government. So these are the stories on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper.
And we move on to The Punch, where we have a lead story talking about the fuel scarcity. It says no planned price hike. It says federal government cues at spread. The riders attached to the lead story this morning. One says there will not be fuel price hike during Yuletide period, says the government. And NMDPRA assures motorists current stock can last for 34 days. The last rider says government cannot risk continued subsidy amid diversion. That's coming from the NMPC source. You can get details of that story on page 2 this morning, the Punch newspaper. Just below that, the bottom strip, we have Adeleke alleges Osun government vehicles missing, issues ultimatum. Okay, that's the governor of Osun State there. That was just sworn into office last week. And you can get that details of that story on page 20. Then Ondo hunter mistakes a man for antelope, shoots him dead. That story is on page 4. Get that. There's more details. And then Aisha Buhari, Twitter critic, remanded in prison. That story is on page 8. And let's take a look at other stories on the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning. It says INEC gears up for election in Northeast, deploys beavers. Page 2 has more details. And the government pays ASU November salary, withholds arrears. Page 30 has more. And the federal government blames governors for rising poverty. Edo and Akwa Ibom differ. Okay, get more details. How they differ, you can get more details on page 14. The last story this morning says Dons back federal government policy on mother tongue teaching. Page 30 accommodates that story in the Punch newspaper this morning.
All right. So let's take a look at this day newspaper. The lead story there talks about Sanwo-Olu. It says, I'm seeking re-election on success of my first term. The writer says it promises to make Lagos a 21st century success story. You would also find at the very top above the masthead, FG blames governors for level of hardship in the country, advises them to tackle poverty, stop building airports and flyovers. Also, you have another one, Silva, Nigeria to end import of petroleum products next year. Nwoko to PDP, expel Wike now. He is no more damage. He's no more damage to do. You also have the other stories. No PVC, no voting in 2023 elections. INEC declares. These are the stories. You have also Oshun Assembly urges Adeleke to allow status quo on local government areas. These are the stories on the front page of this day newspaper.
And then we move on to the Punch. The lead story says, the Nation rather, let's move on to the Nation. Minister, and it says states to blame for rising poverty and hardship. There's a writer attached to that story. Say governors building airports, flyovers, investing in projects with no economic impact. That's the lead story this morning in the Nation newspaper. And just at the top, we have schools to adopt mother tongue as medium of instruction. That's coming from the Minister of Education. Page 2 has more. And INEC says PVC mandatory for voting in 2023 general election. Page 2 has more details. Tinubu for Chatham House talks on security and economy. Page 4 has that. And then we have Abdulrazak takes 189.4 billion naira budget estimate to Assembly. Page 3 of the Nation has more details of that story. And then we'll take a look at some pictorials here on the Nation. We have pictorials of people in a canoe, and that's coming from road. It's for the launch of the Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu's re-election campaign. All right, and there's a pictorial there about the re-election campaign of Governor of Lagos State, so his re-election campaign. And then we have Wike takes on Governor over derivation payments. Wike takes on Governor on derivation payments. It started on the front page, but you continue reading on page 6 of the Nation newspaper. The last story this morning on the Nation newspaper says, Oshomole, PDP a house divided against itself. It has a writer attached to the story. It said, Atiku battle wary and party rattled in states. Okay, that story started on the front page where you get more details, and on page 6 in the Nation's newspaper.
All right, so let's get perspectives on some of these stories. We have in the studio our guest reviewer, Nasiru Lawal, editor at Deadline Nigeria, who joins us for insight on these stories. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
All right. So, two stories that appear to be controversial on our front pages this morning. One of them about, the blame game now. The federal government blaming governors, for the hardship that Nigerians are facing, criticizing the building of airports and flyovers, and roads and projects that they consider as unnecessary. What do you make of this?
Well, I want to side with the federal government in some of the things that it actually mentioned. Like so many states are constructing airports, with no economic value, with no prospect at all, but they are sinking in money simply because maybe they want to help their cronies to get the contracts and what have you. But I don't support the reference to building of flyovers as unnecessary. If you are maybe interested in the state governments doing more to alleviate poverty, that's a different ball altogether. But for you to say they are unnecessary, honestly, I don't think...
But some will argue that this is all part of infrastructural development. Would argue that, if you don't open up the states, how do you attract investment? So one of the ways to do that is by building airports, right? So What would you say to that argument?
But you should also look at the viability of having the airports. Right now, we have so many airports in Nigeria. How many flights do they even have? You know, you have to pay staff, you have to keep it running, you need power, you need so many things, you know, and these are resources that you can actually channel into other productive ventures. So what the federal government is saying basically, or to my own understanding, is the fact that they are getting, the states are getting away with so many things. You know, if all our attention is on the federal government, then so many people will begin to ask, what are the states doing?
Isn't that because the federal government has so much powers?
Well, the states also has like the same amount of powers, because if you look at what they do to the local governments, then it's like 50-50, because right now the states have succeeded in taking over the running of the local governments. You know, when they build primary schools, you know, they want to be the ones in charge. But when it comes to payment of teachers, they will blame the local governments for not doing that, when in reality they have taken over the role of the local governments. So they also have a role to play in actually the level of poverty that we see in the country.
So away from that story, one that caught my attention was pupils in primary 1 to 6 taught in mother tongue. Nigeria is a country with diverse languages. We have over 200 languages in Nigeria. And then mother tongue, it's kind of confusing when you say mother tongue. Is it the 3 major languages or a particular mother tongue? If I belong to a particular tribe, I'm being taught in that tribe. Don't you see some kind of controversy in that? And do you think it's going to work in Nigeria?
The minister tried to explain all that during the briefing of State House correspondents. He actually said we have about 625 or so. And what he is saying basically is in all the localities, you know, you have 1 or 2 languages that are predominant, and that they will be using that as medium of instruction. But then you also have a choice that you may want to learn 1 or 2. So you may take, like somebody that is has Hausa as his mother tongue, may be interested in maybe learning Yoruba. There will be provision for that. That even the English language that we see, you know, it will now be taught as a subject rather than as a medium of instruction. So like you said, there may be some problems, like there are so many words, even at the word level, where you have like different languages, you know, different means of communication. So I will want to see how, you know, that will happen, even though the minister was particular about the fact that this is something that may take long before it can be implemented, you know, because of all.
How practical is this really? Because I'm just thinking about instructional materials, right? I'm thinking about, like you said, the heterogeneous nature of our country. Do we really have that kind of setting where in today's Nigeria, you have a dominant language in a particular place? I mean, you have so many people who have moved as, well, settlers, they call them, right? Even though they are all citizens. So you have Igbos, Yorubas, you know, different people with different tribes settling in different localities, in different communities. What then happens? On the flip side of it, we're talking about uniting Nigeria. We're talking about Nigeria's, you know, unity and diversity and all of that. Don't you think this as something that, you know, will impede on that?
No, and even trampling on people's rights.
Well, the minister, you know, said all that. Some of the things that he said, like I mentioned earlier, is the fact that, you know, it will take some time for them to be able to, like, put all the necessary things in place for this to be implemented. But if you are talking about diversity, I don't think Nigeria is more diverse than India. You know, in India they do that, even though they speak English, but they do all the instruction is in the mother tongue, and they have, you know, like, if not more than.
So Nasiru, a child goes to school from primary 1 to 6. He's taught in mother tongue.
Yes.
Then he switches at the secondary school level or the post-primary level. What language then will he be speaking? Here he is mixing with people from, from different tribes and from different parts of the country.
He will also be studying English as a subject. So right from the beginning, it's not as if he's going to switch completely to something that he is not even familiar with. Right from the beginning, English is going to be there. So
are we really there yet? With the way our educational system is right now, we know how poor, the performance of our public schools especially are in these days. And for private schools who are just trying to make ends meet and trying to make profit, who has the time or resources to really hire people that will be teaching you how to speak your mother tongue, separately, and then English separately, and then French separately, and then other languages like that?
Well, right now we do that. We have like French, we have like the school where
do we really do that, in all honesty?
No,
how efficient?
No, but like I said,
it's there theoretically.
Yes.
Right? You are allowed to do so. You could do so in your curriculum. But is that really practical? Is it what is obtainable? Is it?
That's what the minister said. This thing will take, even to get the instruction materials together, it's going to take, a very long time for
How
it to
long?
be implemented. Well, it's for the minister to explain.
Yes,
because
sometimes.
right now, my problem with all that is the administration is actually nearing its, the end of its tenure. So why should you be coming up with policies that you may not be there to implement? This is like, passing it on to whoever is going to come in as the president, to worry about. So maybe now that they are like 7 or so months away from the end of their tenure, maybe they shouldn't be talking about new policies like this. But from the explanation that he made, and since government is a continuum, like they say, it's something that they think with all the right things in place, it's something that can be implemented. And if you look at the story on the Punch, they were actually able to speak with some university teachers and what have you. And they all supported it because the level of comprehension, you can't compare the what you understand in your own mother tongue and then in English as a second language. So maybe that's what the minister is trying to say. But like I said, they should have allowed whoever is coming in as the next president or as the next government to worry about things like this. You shouldn't bring in something that will not be there to implement.
We worry about implementation, policies first, implementation, and then enforcement follows suit. But we just pray that it's not one of those policies, swept under the carpet when this administration is no more. But getting into another story, of course, which sparked a lot of controversy in the last few days, is the student who criticized Aisha Buhari. He's now remanded in prison. Remember that the parents have tendered apology to the First Lady, and so many civil organizations, political parties are weighing into this matter. What's your take on this event that has let a lot of tongues wagging, I would say?
Well, maybe because it's now in the courts, we may not be able to discuss the specifics. And so far, we've heard from the parents of the student. We've also heard from his lawyer, but we've not heard anything from the First Lady.
First Lady.
So maybe there is a limit to what we can say as regards to that. But the way we use social media in this part of the world, honestly, it leaves much to be desired. People think they have some level of invisibility, because you are using social media in the confines of your room, that you may not be traced for the things that you will say. But then, this is why we also have laws, Those who framed our Constitution were actually intelligent enough to know that things like this will come up. Leaders will be criticized, leaders will be defamed, leaders will be, subjected to all sorts of things. And that's why we have the laws. So what I expect right from the beginning is if you feel hurt by what the student did, there are laws, there are procedures, processes to follow. But what we are reading right now is the fact that he was like kidnapped because they said there was no court backing for that, and then brought to the villa, tortured and what have you. So what happens to our laws? They should have followed the due process, because I saw so many people trying to bring examples of what happened in the past, that so many people were maligned, defamed, and they didn't take it. But that does not mean the current First Lady does not have that right. If she feels hurt in any way, like I said, the laws are there. And if it is defamation, the Constitution is clear on that. If it is even slander or any form of libel, the Constitution is clear. So I will want to see how this goes in the court, because the student will have all the opportunity to state his case, and then also the side of the First Lady will now have their own opportunity to also say why they are taking this action. But already so many lawyers are saying after this one, they should also try to see what they can do regarding the allegations that the First Lady actually took laws into her hands, and that the boy was tortured, in a way that if it happens to be true, honestly, we need to do something about it, because this is going to be a bad precedence. Because if I feel I have the powers to deal with somebody, I just do that without recourse to the law. I don't think it's a good example that we are setting for the people.
All right, so there's a story here that's quite tragic, but again, looks funny to me, really, in all honesty. I cannot understand how a man has a semblance with an antelope. In Ondo State, we are seeing that a hunter mistakes a man for an antelope and shoots him to death. That's tragic. Like, really? How did that even happen? The problem with our people, sometimes we'll claim to be hunters, but then what do? We just go to the fringes and start taking away people's goats and what have you, simply because they stray into some bush path and what have you. But like you said, I also will want to know how an antelope, will look like a human being. Like, was it standing on its 2 feet? So many things to actually find out. But sometimes people do this under influence. You don't know what he must have taken. Yes. So, and sometimes when you do that, you are out of your senses. So you may not be able to even differentiate between a moving object and maybe a vehicle. Does like our laws capture such scenarios, really? In this kind of scenario, what do you call it?
Well,
manslaughter, murder, what do you call it?
Well, the police will make the charge.
Yes.
The police will make the charge, and then his explanation and his ability to prove whatever argument he has will determine the end of it. Because you just cannot claim, okay, it looked like an antelope to me, and then I decided to shoot. Why do you have your senses? You are not an animal. You are a human being. You are expected to think actually before you act. So if maybe he has good lawyers, he has good argument, and is able to convince the judge that actually what I did was not intentional, was not deliberate, probably it may not be seen as, like straight case of manslaughter and what have you.
No, it just depends now. What goes through everybody's mind is what the families of this man who has been mistaken for an antelope will be going through right now. But let's see what happens in court if he's charged to court eventually. Let's take a look at this. INEC, of course, INEC is in the news this morning. It's a PVC mandatory for voting in 2023 general election. And in the past weeks, we've seen what has been happening to INEC offices nationwide in Ogun, in Osun, and then recently we have one in the northeast. PVCs have been burnt down, more than 60,000 PVCs. Yes, we still have time before the general election, but is this not going to affect voting in 2023 elections? What do you think?
Certainly it will affect, because so many people have been disenfranchised with this. If without your PVC, you know, you will not be allowed to vote, then that means whoever is able to, you know, find its way into any of the offices of the electoral body and then destroy the materials, they will be disenfranchising individuals. Like if you look at the lead story of the Daily Trust, I think they are related, because this is a form of electoral violence, because you are trying to find a way of like tilting, you know, the thing towards your own, because the accusation or the allegation right now is that those who think they are not like popular in particular places are actually the ones behind all these destructions. So for INEC to now come out to say those who do not have PVCs will not be allowed to vote. Honestly, I see so many people being disenfranchised if this happens to take place at the end of the day. So what I would have expected INEC to do, since you have a register, you have the beavers and what have you, you should be able to know those that are on your register. And all those who are on the register should be allowed to vote if they can establish the fact that they were not able to collect their PVCs because of what actually happened.
But wouldn't that give room for manipulation? That's again another concern. You know, this PVCs helps in terms of making sure that people accredited to vote actually vote. So it helps to, you know, cut down the issue of manipulation and all that. But if you resort to saying, okay, let's just say, okay, people who have they are on the register and all that, how effective do you think we can actually control that?
Well, I think the only difference with the beavers, you know, because it
you use
like
your PVC.
That's the new part of it, because the beavers, what you do, you no longer have the chance to fill all these incidents form and what have you, because sometimes people will claim that maybe the card reader failed to recognize his thumb or something, you know. So when that happens, the beavers will now use either your picture, you know, or something to be able to establish that yes, you are the actual owner of that PVC. So for you to say people will be using that to like manipulate the system, then it means even the beavers is not as effective as we'll expect it to be, because it should be able to know that this person is not on the register, or this is one of those maybe accused of double registration and what have you. So INEC should, like I said, find a way of accommodating those with valid excuses, you know, those whose PVCs have been destroyed in the course of destroying INEC offices. All
right. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak and giving us these perspectives on the stories making the headlines this morning. Nasiru Lawal, editor, Deadline Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a short breather, and then when we return, we'll be taking a look at the headlines again, and then also our next discussions on the program.